So good evening, everyone. As representatives of PwC, we are pleased to present our proposal to the Department of Revenue of UQANA. I am Ali Banks.
My name is Alvin Newman.
I'm Agnes Wang.
And my name is Tomilola Ogumui.
And we are going to walk you through our proposal for a taxation policy on Bitcoin and other virtual currencies. Just to start off, we'd like this presentation to be very interactive, so if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to stop us and we will definitely walk you through it. As many of you already know, the US currency has not been around forever, nor are these currencies always backed by a central government. Throughout history, ancient societies have created many unique and slightly weird currencies, such as animals, animal skins, beads, shells, and even edible currencies such as spices.
Now, we're a pretty diverse group, so it's safe to say that we've all used at least one form of this kind of currency at one point. Myself in the motherland definitely uses Swarovski.
One currency that we discovered throughout our research is the Ithaca Hours. One important fact about this currency is that it is a local currency for the town of Ithaca, and it is not backed by a central government. So we thought this was pretty similar to Bitcoin and other virtual currencies, but in a more physical form. One key aspect of this currency is that even though it is not backed by the US government, they do collect income taxes on it. So while currencies that are not backed by the government are oftentimes very successful, one key factor of them is that they do not last very long. Ithaca Hours were created over 20 years ago, but they're kind of slightly on the demise right now. So since Bitcoin and other virtual currencies are pretty new and they are not backed by a central government, it is hard to determine how long they will last. So this being a kind of risky factor, we believe that a simple and easy to implement tax proposal is better than a slightly longer, more detailed tax reform.
So as far as the history of Bitcoin, Bitcoin is based off the idea of a cryptographic currency. So it's not controlled by any specific entity, making it a decentralized currency. And Satoshi Nakamoto proposed the concept of Bitcoin in a paper in 2008. It's unaware if he's an individual or a group of people, but he registered the first block of Bitcoin known as the Genesis block. Now, transactions happen when codes are passed throughout a computer network, and the network as a whole, their job is to verify each transaction so that no single Bitcoin is double spent. And coins are generated through a process called mining. What this is a supercomputer a supercomputer's job is to solve a complex mathematical equation. So the individual who solves the complex mathematical equation then is awarded a block of coins. Recently, the first Bitcoin ATM was introduced into a small coffee shop in Vancouver, Canada, and what this is trying to do is individuals are trying to promote the use of Bitcoin to the general public.
We believe that the big picture, which is economic environments, will help us define the best solution to regulate Bitcoins. We researched countries that are considering, or already have Bitcoin's regulations in place. We picked the United States, Japan, and Canada to compare with UQANA. As you can see from the data on the chart, we chose the data of average household income, population, GDP, and the revenue. The purpose that we researched and made the comparison is to define Bitcoins properly. As you can see in the bottom of the slide, United States classify Bitcoins as a property, while Canada classify it as barter. Japan recently decided to go against Bitcoin regulations, so they currently don't have a classification about Bitcoins. Let's take a closer look at the GDP. The UQANA's GDP is on the left. As you can see, the orange part represents the taxes and the revenues. It's a relatively big part comparing to the whole GDP. So comparing to the United States, it has such high GDP. So we're thinking the rules and regulations that work effectively in the bigger economy might not work as effectively as in the smaller economy like UQANA. Also, add to that, we're thinking even countries with a similar size, they can vary in many ways. So the purpose here is we want to examine the economic environments as a whole before we dig into the Bitcoin solution.
So when looking at the question as far as what should virtual currency be classified as, we need to have a counter question, which is whose interests are we serving? Is it tax authority or is it auditors? If Bitcoin is classified as a property, it raises the issue of taxation. It's going to be incredibly difficult to tax, and it's going to be very, very difficult to audit. So then at that point, who benefits? No one. So when classified as a currency, we now have a measurable exchange valuable, and it's reportable and recordable. Not to mention now it's much more easier to tax. It's much more easier to audit. So for this reason, it's in the best interest of Yuquana to classify Bitcoin as a currency.
All right, so as Alvin just mentioned, if we classify it as currency, it's easier to report, record, audit, and tax. So what's the main issue here? Why are we all seated here this evening? The main issue is the lack of identity that Bitcoin has. That you cannot trace the Bitcoin to one specific person. Same way you can't trace the technology behind the email. We don't know who came up with it. We don't know who the Bitcoin, who's involved in Bitcoin transaction. And that now creates a challenge of developing a solution of regulating this Bitcoin transactions without suffocating the growth of new and emerging business and markets. So we decided the best solution to come up with would be to charge a transaction fee directly to Bitcoin businesses that engage in Bitcoin transactions.
So we got the idea of a transaction fee from a tax that actually has not even been implemented yet. Many different representatives in our government have come up with the idea of having a transaction fee on all Wall Street transactions. So what this means is that a tax of 0.03% will be charged on every transaction in Wall Street. So this does not seem like a lot per transaction, but if you look at it over a decade, this tax can raise over $350 billion. And surprisingly, this idea of having a transaction tax has already been implemented in over 30 countries throughout the world.
So here's just a graphic of our proposal. We decided to do a transaction fee once again because it's simple and conservative. And it's safe to say we can't guarantee the future of Bitcoin because its role as a currency is debated by governments and central agencies all around the world. We need to take into consideration that Bitcoin is anonymous in nature. There's a lack of identity of Bitcoin, so rather than trying to figure out who's trading what and who to tax, we decided to propose a transaction fee to Bitcoin-oriented businesses. Just like the Wall Street transaction example, all transactions through Bitcoin would have a transaction fee as well. Now, what that percentage transaction fee would be based off a sensitivity analysis. Later in our presentation, we'll be going through 3 different potential transaction fee percentages that you guys will be able to choose from. Now, due to the uncertainty of how long Bitcoin will last, we believe that the transaction fee will be the best option. Now, let's see if Bitcoin grows significantly, if it increases its popularity, and at that point, we can switch from a really simple conservative transaction fee to something more complex.
We also based our solution off of the recent development that is taking place in New York concerning Bitcoin regulation. So basically, the New York Department of Financial Services recently drew up a framework in regarding to how Bitcoin should be regulated in New York, which requires every Bitcoin-based business, that's any business that deals in the exchange, selling, buying of Bitcoin, to register under a BIT license. What can we draw from this? This shows us that geolocating of Bitcoin transactions is technically feasible. So, because if New York was able to locate what businesses are like working with transactions, that means Yuquana can draw from that and also as well regulate what businesses are dealing with Bitcoin and then directly tax them on those transactions.
All right, I'd like to take you back to the big picture, which is the economy environment in Yuquana. Yuquana's economy is the biggest in South America. The high consumer and investor confidence, along with the historical high GDP in 2012, indicate that Yuquana has been steadily recovering from the 2 years of recession. Targeting inflation, fiscal restraints, debt deduction, and foreign cash inflows are the main goals for the government. Charging transaction fee to Bitcoin transactions makes economic sense because it brings in the revenue to the government that can help them deal with these problems, and also it's conservative and simple comparing to actually doing a tax reform. As I just mentioned, they are recovering from the recession, so we don't suggest them to put in too much time and effort and money in regulating Bitcoins in the short term.
Now, we as a team came up with an estimate of the amount of tax revenue lost by not taxing Bitcoin, which we estimated to be 27.1 million. And this just shows you that it's a large amount of money that we are losing each year by not taxing Bitcoin transactions, and shows the importance of coming up with a good solution to resolve this issue.
So we got that number of tax loss from 3 proposed transaction fees that we had. The 15% came from the income tax that the average household income would receive, and then the 19% is a sales tax that Equana uses. So because we have a transaction fee, it is kind of like a cover-all fee. So it is slightly hard at this point in time to determine the difference in what Bitcoins are being used for sales and what Bitcoins are being used for employment. So we came up with the proposed tax fee of 17%.
Now, when you guys contacted us to advise over this case, we took into some of your pressing questions into consideration, which is the first one: how should virtual currency be treated? We decided to treat Bitcoin as a currency, just as your recent neighbor Obala has just done as well.
So even though it is being considered as a currency, the one unique portion of our proposal is that we are going to be collecting the taxes through a transaction fee.
In addition to that, may I also say that if we use this solution, we can work well with our neighbors. So we don't scare our citizens away to Obala, maybe because we're taxing too much, so Obala is better or anything like that.
And just to bounce off what my colleague was saying, is that we need, based off of what your goal is to if it's either to increase the usage of it, then of course you use a higher interest.
So that is the conclusion of our proposal right now. If you guys have any questions, we would love to address them.
Well, I guess I would have this question. You do have on the screen our concerns about employment taxes and information reporting. How would you address those?
The differences between the income and the reporting. So one of the key benefits of Bitcoin is the secrecy of the identity. So one way to get around that is to possibly use the Bitcoin licensing that they described earlier. But we feel as though the identity of Bitcoin should still be kept secret because that is one of the draws of it. So we got around that identity crisis by going towards the businesses that facilitate the transfers of the Bitcoin.
And to add to that, I think charging a transaction fee is a good short-term way to solve the problem for now. And as the example in New York, they are trying to license all the Bitcoin businesses. We believe that can be the long-term strategy if we do see a growth in Bitcoin demands, and we can require them for information reporting. That's what New York is doing.
Has any research been done as to the sectors in which Bitcoin is most used as a means to transact?
It has been noted that Bitcoin itself has been used for illegal activity mainly, which is why, I mean, that's, I guess, according to them, that would be the benefit of the anonymous nature of it. That is a major sector of it, but at the same time, there's so many different industries that are now beginning to use Bitcoin. For example, Walmart accepted, CVS accepted. There's actually even a website where you'd be able to purchase pizza with Bitcoin.
And PayPal as well.
Right, and the reason I asked that question is because you made a point earlier about how calling it currency would subject it to fluctuations. But then again, tying it back to who leverages, Bitcoin as a way to transact business. Why would you think that a transaction-based penalty versus a currency penalty would sway a user of Bitcoin in one way or the other as far as like the amount of the volume of activity in which they would use Bitcoin?
So one key about Bitcoin is that, especially for Equana, it's only they only make up 3.62% of all of the Bitcoins being used out there. So for the time being, we believe that this transaction fee, get it out there, start collecting revenue, and especially with Equana, we were not given a lot of research on them. It's kind of hard, especially to track who's spending the Bitcoins and things like that. So I assume with time, more records will be taken on like who's spending it, what they're spending it for, and then especially that with our proposal, it might be easier to distinguish a percentage or a percentage that could be used depending on like how much is made up of income or is used to pay their employees and things like that, and maybe even at that point it can be separated out. So this is kind of just a proposal to get it out there, get it started, see how it does, then we'll be able to kind of hopefully record some more information and data on it and make a more intelligent proposal.
That's fair. I mean, that's a tough question given the lack of history behind
Yes,
it. So
especially.
thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I like your idea. It's very, very simple, right? So there's no, doesn't impact employee withholding or anything like that, because it's just a transactional based tax. I saw in one of the slides, was it 17% would be the transaction fee? Is that about what it
That-
Or-
we came up with the idea of 17% because
17,
it was kind of the mean between
Okay.
the sales tax and the income tax, but you can kind of see.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my question would be, is that going to stifle using it? I mean, if you have an option to use cash or the Bitcoin, 17% might be a steep fee to pay. And then I think the second question would be or that's more of a comment, but the second thing I would ask is, and I think you alluded to it, is who's actually going to be paying this tax? Because I'd be interested to see, is it going to be on some of our individuals who are earning less money? Because ultimately it's going to get passed on to the persons who are using it. And I guess there isn't any information about that yet, specifically who's. I guess how would one figure that out? Because it's all anonymous.
Well, what we did is the same way New York is doing that, the same way they figured out which businesses are involved in buying and selling, exchanging, or anything like that. That's like this where we got part of where we got the idea from. So, if they are able to identify who's doing it, then you kind of should be able to do so. That's kind of what we're thinking.
Yeah, so you're going after the people who are dealing in the exchanges.
Yes.
Does that account for most of the like virtually all the transactions, or are there transactions outside of?
Well, I believe it should account for most of it
Okay,
because.
I'm not sure. That's what I was asking.
Oh, okay, yeah. I
Yeah,
believe
and,
that it is.
and to address your percentage question, I mean the percentage, the government can pick a percentage. I'm not randomly pick, and depends on their attitude towards
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
Yeah,
If
that's
they
what I
can-
like about it. You can adjust it so if
Yes.
it's stifling the market. And I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And the attitude's a good word too.
Yeah.
There's the social aspect of it.
Just from a governmental enforcement standpoint, how much do you think it's going to cost us to, enforce the transaction fee to make sure that, people are paying it, submitting it, etc.?
The number right now I can't say because, as mentioned in New York, they actually require like all the business involving in business transaction, I mean the exchange and trade, they have to register and they have to do the information reporting, and they actually have to do like the long paperwork, and we figure that that's gonna cost much more than what we are doing. We are taking the simpler version of it as a starting point, and we will see if that's effective. And we believe that's going to be effective for now, especially we are still recovering from the economy. We really don't want to spend too much money on it, and I believe the budget shouldn't be too big. But we can do more calculation about that.
Okay, great.
I guess just for the sake of clarity, I thought I understand you said you're to keep it simple, you're encouraging it to keep the transactions anonymous, that they don't need to register their Bitcoin usage. How are we going to assess how are we going to assess the transaction fee if we keep the transactions anonymous?
Also, we'll be taxing the Bitcoin businesses, and then because they are the ones that deal with the individuals, so it's what we assume is Bitcoin businesses and then the individuals that directly exchange. So when we tax them, they in turn will push the cost down, to the individuals that are involved. So that's why we don't need to know who the individuals are directly. We just need to know what businesses are exchanging, where like the main source of the Bitcoin is coming, like the main businesses that
Okay.
source the Bitcoin.
Okay, and then I guess then the follow-up question is that this tax or the transaction fee that's going to be paid to the government, can that be paid? How will that be paid? Will that be paid in Bitcoins, or will it be paid in local currency?
It looks like that it probably would have to be incorporated through Bitcoin. So just like a lot of these other businesses are joining the whole Bitcoin trend, we're not saying that the government is a business, but they would probably have to begin accepting Bitcoin as well.
It's very hard to have it.
It's a transaction fee. That's what I like. It's not a tax. We're not using a tax.
It's the Wall Street.
It's much more appealing, right? Would you rather pay tax or a transaction fee?
It sounds nice, that's true.
Transaction fee.
That's right.
Pretty steep.
And especially, yeah, right.
70%.
Right.
Yeah, the reason why
Amex
we
is only 3.
the reason why we chose the 17% is because of the data that we got from Equana, saying that the 15% was the income tax and then the 19% was the sales tax. So we tried to pick something in between that, but you can easily adjust it to be something significantly less than that, but we believe that that'll bring in a significant revenue to the government.
Yeah, and as you pointed out earlier, to the extent that additional data and profiles you can develop, you can sort of adjust that.
Definitely.
It's easy enough to do.
Okay.
All right.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Good job.